Good morning. Welcome to episode 18 of Tea, Coffee, and Torah. I'm glad to have you with me this morning. First of all, I have a great announcement to make. I have finished my book. I did all the final edits. So the Does Jesus Exist should be out here in the next couple of weeks. We're still waiting on the typesetter to do a few things. And when they're finished with their work, it's going to go live. So be looking for that because I'm going to start posting. I'm also going to start posting a lot of excerpts and a lot of quotes from the book. So don't be intimidated. My first book was rather long, The Yahweh Exists Volume 1. But this one, the text itself is only 186 pages. So it is a lot shorter, easy to read. And it's really a story of my personal journey and the evidence that I've considered as in my quest for truth and the scholarship I have considered. So anyways, I hope you'll check that out. It is not live on Amazon yet, but I will certainly post when it is. So we have been talking about Tel El-Arad and about the high places in Israel. Today, I want to step back a little bit. I want to go back to kind of the foundation of the high places, where they take off, where they become popular, and why we see this become an issue in Israel. So first of all, we know that even as early as the Bronze Age, which this would have been even before Israel came into the land of Canaan, that there were indeed high places in Canaan. These were associated with cultic worships. You had the Canaanite goddess Shemesh, where she was worshipped at Beth Shemesh. You have also a whole bunch of other sites. Beth El would have been an original high place. You know, this is mentioned in Genesis with Jacob. And they weren't always originally profane. Some of them actually were associated with the worship of Yahweh. But the history of this, the archaeology, and the events, the chronology becomes very important in this discussion. So I want to jump into what we know biblically. So let's look at a little bit of history because the history really enlightens our understanding of high places and how they developed in ancient Israel. So first of all, you have Israel comes into the land. They renew the covenant at Shechem. And you find that that is very early where Israel would have had a tabernacle, the Ark of the Covenant, the same one that would have been in the wilderness. According to rabbinic chronology, and you know, I am not a fan of rabbinic chronology because it gets a lot of things wrong, but I find that this one number could be very correct. It definitely fits the biblical evidence. And that is, according to biblical chronology, the ark rested at Shiloh for 369 years. If this is correct, if this is based on sources that we have lost, but were retained, you know, in rabbinic sources, it appears then that the Ark of the Covenant, the Tabernacle, was in Shechem for 11 years before it was moved to Shiloh, and that became the sanctified place. Now, Shiloh would have been as part of Mount Ephraim, so it would have been in that territory. But you find that towards the end of the 369 years, Israel is steeped in idolatry. They're worshiping all the Canaanite gods. And then you find the Philistines become the rival power. They are attacking Israelite cities. They are conquering them. And Israel is becoming under oppression during the Judges era to the Philistines. And if I sound a little stuffy this morning, it is because I'm fighting a cold. I'm actually getting over it. But that is why I'm stuffy. So if you hear a little nasal, that's it. But what you find is that, first of all, Israel, at least into the way I understand Israel's chronology, Israel would have come into the Promised Land. The era of conquest would have happened right around 1508. This is very early. And then you find that 369 years later puts us right at 1128 BCE. This is when Shiloh would have been abandoned. You know, Eli, the high priest, he dies, and you find that the Ark of the Covenant is captured. Now, there's some discrepancy regarding the chronology. There's a verse in First Samuel that states that the Ark of the Covenant was only in the Philistine territory for 7 months. And that very well could be, but whatever the case is, there is a gap of, let me see here in my notes, of a good 100 years, almost 100 years. It's actually, I think, closer to 76 years, where the Ark of the Covenant doesn't have a home. It's not in Israel. And then finally it comes to rest for Mizpah. We're told in 1 Samuel 7:12 that the Ark of the Covenant comes to rest in Mizpah and is there for 20 years. So this dates us right around to 1071 BCE that the Ark enters Mizpah. And this is fascinating because if you look at Judges, and not just Judges, even down into the days of Jeremiah, Mizpah becomes an administrative center. It becomes a place that Israel gathers for all of her assemblies. And she likely also gathers there to celebrate Sukkah, to celebrate all the holy days. And the reason for this is it appears that Shiloh was probably sacked by the Philistines during this time period. You know, Jeremiah tells us that Yahweh forsook the place of Shiloh and he removed his name from that site. It appears that Mizpah had better defenses. It also had a view. And today Mizpah is identified with the Palestinian occupied city of Ramallah. So this area, when you look at it geographically, had a great view of the horizon where you could have seen enemies coming. It was very defendable. It was also fortified so that it could again be protected against an invading army. So this is probably why the site was chosen. Now, Mizpah is specifically mentioned as being in the land of Benjamin, where previously Shiloh was in the land of Ephraim. And this is simply probably because this site was better, it had better defenses, and Shiloh was compromised. It could no longer be defended against the Philistines. You find also in Samuel that it talks about Samuel's war against the Philistines and the cities that they reclaimed. Some of these may have been reclaimed under both Samuel and King Saul, but needless to say, a lot of the territory was recovered. We also find that Jephthah meets at Mizpah, and Jephthah's judgeship would have coincided with Samuel's priesthood. And we're going to get into Samuel a little bit next time. But for now, I just want you to know that Samuel and Jephthah would have been contemporaries. They would have lived at the same time. So when you have Jephthah encouraging Israel to forsake their gods, to bury them, to get rid of them, it was probably at the request and at the admonition of Samuel. So we find all of this occurring at the same time. We also find that it is during this time that the high places archaeologically become vogue in Israel. And I want to talk about why, because really this reason of why is at the heart of the issue of the high places. Archaeologically, you don't find a lot of high places before the 12th and 11th centuries BCE. So this is from, right around 1299 all the way down to about 1000 BCE. You find that this is when the high places really become vogue in Israel. Well, I find this not coincidental, that this coincides perfectly with the time that the sanctified, the legitimate tabernacle in Israel is forsaken. The Ark of the Covenant is captured. There is no viable means for Israel to worship Jehovah. There is, and the high places come to replace Shiloh. We are told of at least 4 high places that that become popular in Israel. There's one at Bethel, and you can look at this in 1 Samuel 7:16. But there's a high place in Bethel, which would have dated all the way back to the Genesis period, with Jacob anointing the pillar at Bethel as he leaves as he leaves the land of Canaan, going to Laban's house and seeking a wife and seeking protection and shelter from his brother Esau. You also have another high place at Gilgal. Later, Solomon, before the temple is built, he'll come to Gilgal and he will worship Yahweh at Gilgal. You also find that Gilgal served as a place of worship when Israel first comes into the land after the Exodus. You also, again, have Mizpah that is listed as a high place. And then during the days of Samuel makes Ramah, where his hometown was, a high place. And then you find that Samuel goes on this circuit to these 4 high places throughout the year. Now, I think it's very, very logical, and I don't see any contradiction with the biblical text to find that Levites would have served in these high places, and they were served in the capacity of serving Yahweh. So, because there was no official tabernacle at this time, it had been forsaken. The Ark of the Covenant was not there. Later, we find that the Ark of the Covenant is going to end up in the house of Obed-Edom before it is finally deposited at the temple in Jerusalem. Now, the temple in Jerusalem is not erected. It is not completed until 972 BCE. So there is a period of almost 200 years where Israel does not have access to a centralized tabernacle, a centralized location to worship Yahweh. So it makes perfect sense that the people would then seek Yahweh by whatever means they had available and closer to their home communities. But then we find over time, and again, this is very much parallels the Judges era, that while you had a worship of Yahweh in these tabernacle or in these high places, that they also began to worship. I just lost my shelter here, so bear with me with the sun. The wind took that away. So we find that with these high places, they began to worship Ashtoreth. They began to combine Yahweh's worship with Baal. So it was no longer a singular monotheistic religion. They really began to combine the worship of Yahweh in these high places. And we'll get into that a little bit next time. So that's what I want to really leave you with today, is just these high places and their etymology, how they developed in Israel, and why we see them become vogue during the 12th and 11th centuries BCE. Now, another point that I want to make is when we come back in our next couple of sessions, let me grab a swig of Joe here. And that is, our landscape here is going to change. The setting is going to change. I am going to be going inside because it is getting colder. And I'm sorry, I can't do these in 32 degrees. I know I can put a coat and a blanket on, but I'd rather be inside. So I hope you'll join me next time. We're going to delve into this deeper. We are going to come back to Tel El-Rod and other high places. And we're also going to come back to the use of cannabis in high places and how it became vogue throughout the ancient Near East in the 8th century BCE. And see how this even likely informs us of King Uzziah and why King Uzziah's ingress into the temple and trying to burn incense was so was considered such a violation of what was sanctified according to the written Torah. So join me next time. I've enjoyed this time with you. Oh, I've got to get some shelter here. My eyes are watering. But I've enjoyed this time with you. I pray you'll join me next time and have a fantastic day. And look for my book, Does Jesus Exist? I'll be posting more on this in the days ahead.